When I sat down to play Blake Manor, I had a brief bit of familiarity wash over me. A game where you explore a large mansion full of mysteries, published by Raw Fury? You can't make me put another 80 hours into Blueprints, I refuse! Was this about a rough draft version of the house? No, no more! Well, in actuality, the Seance of Blake Manor is pretty far apart from the room drafting phenom. While there is a complex web of mysteries to untangle, the execution is entirely different, more a whodunit than a how solve it, and it's quite excellent in its own right as long as you allow for a bit of crustiness to the gameplay. Detective Declan Ward is invited out to a remote manor-turned-hotel in Western Ireland to discover what happened to a missing woman named Evelyn Dean. The manor is hosting an unusual seance to communicate with the dead in 3 days, and you have until then to solve every mystery before disaster strikes each and every person in the building, if not all of Ireland itself. The gameplay can best be explained through the initial prologue, which takes place on the first night. You walk about the place in a first-person perspective, and though you'll occasionally see a ghost pop up here or there, I would not label this as a jump scare game. It's really more haunting than scary. No pun intended. Or maybe it is intended? You check in at the desk and are introduced to the conversation mechanics of the game. With each new character you meet, you can do a Sherlock-style observation of their physical features and body language, and then you can ask them about any of the evidence, topics, or other suspects you've encountered. Anytime you do this, the in-game clock moves forward by 1 minute. This clock doesn't move on its own, and in fact, you can travel around the manor without a single second inching forward until you either interact with a person or with an item on screen. Think of it like the time mechanics in Sierra's The Colonel's Bequest or the Crimson Diamond, rather than a real-time clock like you'd see in Jordan Mechner's legendary adventure game The Last Express. That also means that you'll be eavesdropping on people as characters move about the mansion at the top of every hour. As long as you're thorough in investigating the usual public areas, you should be able to see all of these moments, and they'll help fill out your mystery board with even more information, which I'll get into in a second. In order to track people's movements, you have a timetable section of your UI, which gets updated whenever you ask a suspect about their plans for the weekend. Of course, suspects are known to lie, or even just forget, which is why you'll want to find some sort of itinerary book in their hotel room as well to get the full picture. Nobody's just gonna let you into their room, though. For example, in the prologue, Declan believes that the hotel's manager may not be telling the whole story about Evelyn leaving abruptly, so he wants to get into his office. The manager mentions problems with the telegraph machine in the parlor, so if you go in there and solve a simple puzzle to get it running again, he'll leave his station to start sending telegrams, which means you can sneak into his office and root around his desk. Of course, that room is unlocked while guest rooms are not, so you'll have to find the master keys around the hotel if you want to do any snooping on the various suspects. And boy are there a lot of them. There are nearly 25 different characters to investigate, each of whom have secret motives and intentions involving the seance. And what's really impressive to me about the game is that none of them feel hollow. They all stand apart from their belief systems to their behavior to their motivations. And though some of them are plotting to do some pretty wicked things, you also can't help but root for them at the same time. There have been a lot of murder mysteries over the years where the victim is heavily disliked, but to be disliked by this many people is quite a feat. Is this what it's gonna be like when Woody Allen dies? That variety is quite necessary because as far as gameplay goes, Hour 1 is going to be similar to Hour 10. Regardless of where you're at in the story, you're still walking about the mansion, interrogating people and examining items while the clock continues to lurch forward. It's more involved than a walking simulator, but this isn't exactly Deus Ex either, so the story and the characters do have to do some heavy lifting, but they're more than capable of the task. Blake Manor weaves a ton of Irish, English, Egyptian, and American mythologies and religious figures together in a way that celebrates the differences and crossover between our various cultures. While the central supernatural plot is distinctly Irish in nature, other interpretations are also validated, and people's practices all collaborate in different ways across each other's stories. One character uses voodoo practices, another uses a spirit camera, one person's just a straight-up druid. O'Finn is chill, I'd love to hang out with that guy. As you collect clues, you will eventually be able to form hypotheses, in which you construct a sentence based on the various pieces of evidence that lays out each character's plans. Some are murderous, some are just desperate actions, and others are more innocuous, but each suspect will need to be confronted once you've put your thoughts into place. Although, even on confession, you might be asked to do more in order to fully resolve a character's story, like finding evidence of blackmail or helping them commune with a ghost. Once a character is at peace, not in the ghost way, they're not moving on into the afterlife, their fate at the seance will change, and a weird device in the main atrium will slowly drain. Is it possible to save every single person in the hotel? Well, almost. And so that's where the main tension lies. Can you solve each mystery before the end of the third day? For my part, I was able to solve all but one mystery, but did still save each person. You'll get an extra scene if you can fully clear the game. And just to be clear, this isn't one of those choices matters games. There are specific things you have to do just to survive yourself, and a final choice at the end can bring devastating consequences, but otherwise it's all up to your own investigative abilities. So how lenient is the time limit aside from my completion percentage? I'd say it's relatively lenient, like the Atelier Dusk trilogy rather than the Rorona games. Wait, okay, I can't just compare everything to Atelier. It's like when you have a social obligation that's coming up and it's ever present in your mind, and you worry that it's arriving sooner and sooner, but in reality you have all the time you need to do everything you're gonna do. Anyone? Is that just me? Yeah, not being able to examine literally everything is a bit of a bummer, but to the game's credit, some interactions are clearly there as filler. If you run out of time because you keep looking at folded clothes straight out of the laundry, you probably wouldn't cut it as a private detective. The game also allows you to re-examine anything you've already looked at without a time penalty, and opening closets or desk drawers doesn't cost anything. Plus, the time-freezing roaming that I mentioned before, it's honestly pretty generous, just there to give you a small sense of urgency as the final hours draw near. The game's visuals utilize stark graphic novel visuals with deep black contrast shadows that make even mundane photographs look kind of eerie. The less realistic approach to the visuals makes for smooth performance, running at a near flawless 60 frames per second on the Steam Deck, sharp and crisp. Less smooth is the loading, which can take around 7 to 8 seconds and happens between every single room. That really didn't bother me that much though until the end point when I was going back to get other achievements, but it's something people have complained about in reviews, so I figured I'd mention it. The music is suitably unnerving, slowly ebbing in and out of the campaign and sometimes utilizing glitch pads, and every character is voice acted, though only in major scenes, which is fair given that you eventually have like a triple-digit number of pieces of evidence and information, and it'll always take a smaller file size over needlessly reading out all of that. The UI is pretty good, shortcutting each menu tab to the D-pad, although I'd have preferred having the map on the back button instead. Mysteries have a mind map that get fleshed out as you profile characters and investigate their belongings, for convenient access to all the things you've learned. The menu would sometimes open up on a specific character's mystery rather than the mystery world map, so to speak, and that was a bit annoying, but otherwise I have no real problem with the interface. I do have issues with the typos and grammatical errors though, which began ramping up more and more by the end of the game. One sentence had an errant semicolon in it. An errant semicolon! I'm not a loser for getting tilted at that. Do not put in the paper that I got tilted. Perhaps the most surprising thing about the Seance of Blake Manor is that it comes from developer Spooky Doorway, who last gave us the comedic Dark Side Detective games. And maybe it's just me, but I would have never expected something like this to come from them. I was always lukewarm on the Dark Side Detective games as they had a somewhat stiff presentation and the humor was not really working for me. But this game really blew me away by comparison. Whether it's the engaging story or the intriguing characters, the mysterious manor or the various sinister plots, there's always a new thread to tug at every turn. In that sense, I suppose it is kinda like Blueprints. And like Blueprints, Blake Manor is one of my favorite games of 2025. If you've been following the channel for a while, you might be interested to watch my previous video where I discuss the channel's history and make big plans for the future. If you're lazy, and I get it, so am I, the big news is I'll be splitting my animation and animated reviews off to their own channel called Animation Wilson, which you can find a link to in the description below. That channel will be spearheaded by a remaster of Bonus Stage, the cartoon I made over 20 years ago. Here on this channel, I'll continue to talk about indie games as we near Game of the Year time. I still have so much to play, I'm in danger. And I do art commissions now, the details of which are probably in the description as well. Special shout out to my indie darlings on Patreon: Tyler McBride, Game Trekker, Rob Ska, Thumpus, and Tony Domenico. And thanks to my channel members here on YouTube. Until next time, you'll find me in another castle.